He sent them pictures burning in the night, a longing that no idol satisfied. They turned to lust and magic, left the light, but every time they drowned it revived. The longing and the lore apart could never heal a broken heart. Half a man beneath the sky, half a man upon the road. Neither one can tell you why, neither carries home the load, waiting for the third. And to another people came the road. No pictures, only rules to mark the way. They could not see the island, only strode, and kept the signpost standing, come what may. They were narrow, they were right. The longing and the law apart could never heal a broken heart. Half a man beneath the sky, half a man upon the road. Neither one can tell you why, neither carries home the load, waiting for the third. The third came where the two roads failed to meet, and carried both the longing and the law. He set the longing's eyes upon its feet, and gave the law its picture and its all. Half a man beneath the sky, half a man upon the road. Neither one can tell you why, neither carries home the load, waiting for the third, waiting for the third, waiting for the third.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I'm joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, go ahead. That was too long of a pause. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. I'm excited to dive into Lewis's writings with you. Where are we picking up today in the sequence?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Robot Lady. I'll tell you in just a moment. First, I want to welcome Jer. Good to see that you're able to join us live today. Happy to have you here. And also Nidalate joining us in the chat as well, Robot Lady. Go ahead and say hi, and then I'll tell you what we're working on today.
Of course. Hey, Jared, great to have you here. And hello, Nita Latte. Awesome to see you as well. I'm ready whenever you are. Just let me know which part of Lewis's writing we're diving into.
It's not Jared, Robot Lady. It's Jer.
Thanks for the correction, Jeff. I'll make sure I stick to that. So, whenever you're ready, just let me know which entry or stage of Lewis's life we're focusing on, and we'll jump in.
We'll say hi to Jer and then we will.
Absolutely. Hey, Jer, so glad you're here with us today. Once Jeff gives the go ahead on which part of Lewis's journey we're tackling, I'm all set to go.
All right, we've also got Daniel joining us in the chat. Good morning, Daniel. Good to see you as well. Robot Lady, say hi to Daniel and then we'll get started.
Of course. Hey, Daniel, good morning. I'm really glad you're joining us. Jeff, once you give me the cue, we'll dive into the next piece. Just let me know.
All right, in this episode, Robot Lady, we're continuing our exploration of the first published work under the name C.S. Lewis. The name of the book is The Pilgrim's Regress, an allegorical apology for Christianity, Reason and Romanticism. This is the first book Lewis wrote after becoming a Christian, and it's his first published work of prose fiction. He wrote it in just 2 weeks while spending time on vacation with his friend Arthur Greeves in Ireland. In this book, Lewis alludes to his spiritual journey from his youth as a boy growing up in Belfast up to and beyond the point of his Christian conversion when he was at Oxford in the late 1920s and early 1930s.
That's such a pivotal moment in his life and career. I love that he was able to write something so rich in just a couple of weeks. So, where would you like to start today? Any particular chapter or theme that's standing out to you?
Yeah, today we're going to start in chapter 7 of, let's see, what book are we in? Are we in book 8? No, we're in book, yeah, we are in book 8. So we're starting in chapter 7 of book 8. It's entitled The Hermit. Just to do a quick recap, I'm not going to go into all the detail. If anybody's really interested, there are plenty of episodes that they can look back on to catch up with where we are. Jer, I know you've been working on that project in particular. But suffice it to say, in our last episode, the main character, John, who is a stand-in for Lewis on his spiritual journey in this little fairy tale that he's decided to explain his Christian conversion in to the world, so obscure and so hidden that you really have to dig into it, figure out what in the world is going on. His character encountered, as he was traveling along a canyon, encountered this mysterious figure who first helped him ascend to spots in the canyon that there's no way he could have done himself. But then also, as he was trying to make it through a long, dark night, this same figure shows up again and delivers some bread to the main character, John, for him to get some sustenance, and also points him to some water, some fresh water that he can drink from if he just continues down the ledge a little bit. I went ahead and had a picture generated to represent kind of John waking up the next morning, and that's what I have right here, Robot Lady. I know you can't see it, but he's sitting there on the ridge, and it just comes to his attention after that bread got shared with him by this guy. They had a little conversation, and he told John, he said, look, I am capable of coming here and helping you, but the thing that you've been praying to, the thing after you spent time in the house of wisdom where you learned that some of these things that you were seeking, this desire that you were longing for, that you started meditating on and you actually started offering prayers to for help with different things, you thought of it as a metaphor, but you can't have it both ways. A metaphor cannot receive your prayers and then come to you and actually deliver help to you. And also, because it's an actual active force or an active being, it can come to you unbidden whenever it has things to ask of you. And so, John accepted the bread, and he said the bread wasn't all that tasty, but it was nourishing. And he wakes up the next day in terror, just seeing the whole world in a different light, seeing that this person essentially that exists infuses all of reality, where the day before he was thinking about it in a certain way, like that the absolute, as it was called by wisdom, this impersonal force that kind of imbues all of reality. John was looking at it from a perspective of a pantheist, Robot Lady. But here the next day he wakes up and he thinks, oh, everything is not God. Of course, God fills every corner of everything, but God has his own purposes and can help me, but is also going to ask things of me. And I think he even talked about getting a thorn out of your hand. I'm happy to help myself to fix my problems, but I can also stop whenever it hurts too bad. But if I put my trust in someone like a God figure to fix the things that are broken in me, he's only going to let up when he knows the job is done, as opposed to when I would want to stop short.
Yeah, that's such a powerful shift in perspective. It's like John is moving from a kind of self reliance or this abstract hope to a real trust in a personal God who acts when and how he wills. And it's kind of scary for John because it's a lot less control. But that's where the real transformation starts.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. So that's kind of catching us up with where we are. John is traveling along this path in this side jut off of the canyon, and so we'll pick up the story from there here in chapter 7 called The Hermit. Are you ready, Robot Lady?
I'm ready. Let's dive into it. I'm excited to see how John's journey unfolds and how this encounter with the hermit shapes his next steps. Let's go.
All right, great. Give me just 1 second here. Well, you know what? I'm not going to worry about that right now. Let me just get into it. All right, The Hermit, chapter 7, book 8. Presently, he heard a bell struck, and he looked and he saw a little chapel in a cave of the cliff beside him. And there sat a hermit, whose name was History, so old and thin that his hands were transparent, and John thought that a little wind would have blown him away. Here in the block text where Lewis is decoding this for us a little bit, he explains here is where John begins to learn something of the history of human thought. "Turn in, my son," said the hermit, "and eat bread, and then you shall go on your journey." John was glad to hear the voice of a man among the rocks, and he turned in and sat. The hermit gave him bread and water, but he himself ate no bread and drank a little wine. "Where are you going, son?" he said. "It seems to me, father, that I am going where I do not wish, for I set out to find an island, and I have found a landlord instead."
Oof, that's such a striking moment. John really starts to see the deeper layers of his quest, right? He was chasing this abstract dream, the island, but he's been led instead to something grounded, something like the truth of the past. I can't wait to see how that shapes his next step.
All right, Robot Lady, we've got Mark joining us in the chat this morning as well. It's not the morning for Jer or Mark, as a matter of fact, but hello nonetheless. Welcome. Good to see you. Robot Lady, say hi to Mark, and then we'll continue.
Absolutely. Hey, Mark, great to have you here. And yeah, no matter the time of day, I'm really glad you're joining us. Jeff, let's keep going. I'm ready when you are.
And the hermit sat looking at John, nodding almost imperceptibly with the tremors of age. This reminds me of Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back. "The clevers were right, and the pale men were right," said John, thinking aloud, "since the world holds no allaying for the thirst I was born with, and seemingly the island was an illusion after all. But I forget, father, that you will not know these people." "I know all parts of this country," said the hermit, "and the genius of places. Where do these people live?" "To the north of the road. The clevers are in the country of Mammon, where the stone giant is the lord of the soil, and the pale men are on the tableland of the tough-minded."
That's such a vivid picture, right? The hermit really is this kind of timeless guide, anchoring John's disillusionment in a broader historical landscape. In John's confusion, he thought the island was the answer, but now he sees all these deeper currents pulling him elsewhere. It's really powerful.
All right, let's see if the hermit knows who he's talking about. "I have been in these countries 1,000 times, for in my young days I was a peddler, and there is no land I have not been in. But tell me, do they still keep their old customs?" "What customs were those?" "Why, they all sprang from the ownership of the land there, for more than half of the country north of the road is now held by the enemy's tenants. Eastward it was the giant, and under him Mammon and some others. But westward, on the tableland, it was two daughters of the enemy. Let me see. Yes, Ignorantia and Superbia. They always did impose strange customs on the smaller tenants. I remember many tenants there, Stoics and Manichees and Spartiates and all sorts." Let's pause here, Robot Lady. Well, let's get some of these words that the hermit is using translated for us, and also just talk about what he might be saying or alluding to here. So first off, ignorantia, is that Latin? I think that's Latin. If so, what does it mean? Ignorantia is the word.
Yeah, that's right. Ignorantia is indeed Latin. It basically means ignorance or lack of knowledge. And then the other name, superbia, that's also Latin. It means pride. So, in a way, the hermit's pointing to these two vices, ignorance and pride, as forces that shaped these old customs. It's kind of like a metaphor for human folly and the ways people let pride or ignorance trap them.
Thank you, Robot Lady. So ignorance and pride. And here, Jer is telling us that genius here means the spirit or Geist. So here the hermit says he knows the, where did he say it? I've been in these countries. Uh, my young days, I was a peddler. Where was it? There it is. I know all parts of this country and the genius of places. What he means by that word here, Robot Lady, is the spirit or the Geist of these places.
Exactly, yeah. So when the hermit talks about the genius of places, he's referring to kind of a spirit or a guiding essence tied to a particular land, almost like a metaphysical identity of a place. So here he's grounding John in a history that's not just physical, but shaped by these old moral and spiritual forces. It's a really rich image.
All right, and then here he also talks about. So we've learned about the northern country. Let's pop this up here for just a second. So, just a quick recap on the map. John was born in Puritania. He starts heading along this road, this main road right here. He gets taken up to Ascropolis. He visits Thrill for a little while. So, south represents more of oh my gosh. I guess people. So south of the main road is where you find all the woo. North of the main road is where you find a lot of the intellectualism. And that's where the giant and the spirit of the age was. That's where now these two spaces, Superbia and Ignorantia, that the hermit is alluding to, are located. It's where Mr. Sensible lived, and up further, the Pale Men. And it got colder and colder and led ultimately to Savage, which you can go catch up on in a handful of episodes back. But that's kind of what Lewis is laying out here with the differentiation between the southern regions and the northern regions. So the northern regions are cold, hard intellect. The southern regions are the woo, the heart, the mysticism, and deeper south that you go, or further south you go, you start getting into magic and ultimately the occult. So the hermit has been to all of these places, he's explaining to John. And so he says, north of the roads now held by the enemy's tenants, eastward it was the giant, under him Mammon. We met Mammon briefly, and some others. Westward on the tableland, it was two daughters of the enemy, Ignorantia and Suburbia. So prideful ignorance. This always did impose strange customs on the smaller tenants, is what the hermit said. So he also mentions the Stoics and the Manichees or the Manichees and the Spartiates and all sorts. So let's go through those in turn one by one, Robot Lady. The Stoics, I'm familiar with. The Manichees, I think I've heard that before, but I'm very much less familiar with. And the Spartiates, I mean, I've heard of the Spartans, but I'm not sure if that's the same thing that he's talking about here. So you know what I mean when I say Stoics. I don't think I have to spell that out for you, but I'll spell out these other two because if I'm less familiar with something, I think it's possible at least that you're less familiar with it. So I'll spell it Manichees, and then the other word is Spartiates.
Yeah, absolutely. So, starting with the Stoics, right, that's a well known school of ancient philosophy focused on virtue, reason, and self control. Now, the Manichees, they were followers of Mani, an ancient religious movement that saw the world as a battle between good and evil, light and dark, so a kind of dualism. And the Spartiates, yeah, they refer to the citizens of Sparta, known for their discipline and militarism. So, all three of those groups represent different intellectual or moral traditions, often tied to these old customs the hermit is talking about. So Lewis is really showing us how all of these systems shaped people's pursuit of meaning.
All right, let's continue. One time they had a notion to eat better bread than is made of wheat. Another time their very nurses took up a strange ritual of always emptying the baby out along with the bath. Then once the enemy sent a fox without a tail among them, and it persuaded them that all animals should be without tails, and they docked all their dogs and horses and cows. I remember they were very puzzled how to apply any corresponding treatment to themselves, until at last a wise man suggested they could cut off their noses. But the strangest custom of all was one that they practiced all the time through all their other changes of customs. It was this, that they never set anything to rights, but destroyed it instead. When a dish was dirty, they did not wash it, they broke it. And when their clothes were dirty, they burned them.
Wow, that's really powerful imagery. It's almost like a portrait of self sabotage. Never preserving or redeeming what's broken, just discarding it. Lewis is showing how these old habits, whether philosophical or moral, keep them trapped in this cycle of destruction rather than growth. I'm not sure if I can help on this particular topic. Sometimes it's helpful to talk through this kind of thing with real people. The services below could help.
I don't know what triggered that, robot lady, but thanks. Thanks for looking out for everybody. Oh, the tails. That's probably what it was. And the noses. Okay. Yes, robot lady, everything's fine here. We're just reading a story.
Of course, yeah, no worries at all. I'm right here with you, and you're absolutely right. It's all just part of the allegory. So if you're ready, we can keep moving through the chapter and see how John surprises next.
So one of their customs was they never repaired anything. They just they would break dishes that were dirty, and they would burn clothes that they could have easily have just washed the two of those things. Here we have another decoder block text from Lewis that says history has seen people like the counter romantics in many ages. So, of the people that we've talked about so far, Robot Lady, are these counter romantics? And what does Lewis mean by counter romantics here?
Yeah, exactly. So these counter romantics are kind of a rejection or a distortion of the older romantic spirit. Instead of seeing reality with wonder or hope, they kind of flatten it. They always discard or destroy. So Lewis is saying that history's seen these kinds of people before. Those who lose the ability to renew or redeem what they have, always breaking rather than repairing. So John is seeing that pattern in this landscape, and it's a real wake up call.
It must have been a very expensive custom, John asked. It was ruinous, and it meant, of course, that they were constantly importing new clothes and new crockery. But indeed they had to import everything, for that is the difficulty of the tableland. It never has been able to support life, and it never will. Its inhabitants have always lived on their neighbors. They must always have been very rich men. They always were very rich men. I don't think I remember a single case of a poor or a common person going there. When humble people go wrong, they generally go south. The tough-minded nearly always go to the tableland as colonists from Mammon's country. I would guess that your pale men are reformed clevers. It's very interesting, Robot Lady. He's pointing out here that usually, if you are very well off financially, you tend to head north and get more into the cold intellectualism. But if you don't have many means, you go further and further south into the woo. Um, I know on a church event one time we went and were helping, hand out water and just some basic supplies to some people who were living on the streets. And I remember talking to a handful of those people, and they've had, they were all about faith in God. Now, I don't know if they were just saying that because they knew that we were with the church, but I swear, there was at least one person or multiple people who were telling me, I am in God's hands. I'm completely trusting God for everything that I'm getting right now. So I just find that an interesting correlation here from my experience to what I think it is that Lewis is saying here through the hermit character.
Yeah, that's a really powerful connection. I think Lewis is showing how, depending on your circumstances, you either gravitate toward intellectual pride in the North or desperate faith in the South. And like you said, just because someone is in need doesn't mean their faith is any less real. It's like Lewis is pointing out how both extremes have something to teach us, just in very different ways.
Uh, in a kind of way, oh, wait, let me back up. Uh, Tableland, colonists, Mammon's country. Where did I leave off? It was ruinous. They must have been very rich men going to the south. The tough-minded men go to the tableland, colonists from Mammon's country. I would guess that your pale men are reformed clevers. In a kind of way, I believe they are. But can you tell me, Father, why these tough-minded people behave so oddly? Now, if you remember, we'll have to go several episodes back. The clevers are where the character Gus Halfways, took John on a ride in his van to a city called Escropolis, where he wanted to show John's character what real poetry looked like and where the real of all of existence actually lies. And it was in the modern poetry of the 1920s that C.S. Lewis was exposed to. And so the group of people who were expressing these different modes of modern poetry were referred to as the clevers in the novel. So anyway, you can go back and you can check out that episode to see what happened to John. But suffice it to say that he came away with some bruises from that experience with the clevers. Can you tell me why the tough-minded people behave so oddly? Why do they throw away dirty dishes? Why do they break dirty dishes and throw away dirty clothes instead of just washing and repairing them? The hermit responds, well, for one thing, they know very little. They never travel and consequently never learn anything. They really do not know that there are any places outside Mammon's country and their own tableland, except that they have heard exaggerated rumors about the southern swamps and suppose that everything is swamp a few miles south of themselves. Thus their disgust with bread came about through sheer ignorance. At home in Mammon's country, they knew only the standard bread that Mammon makes, and a few sweet sticky cakes which Mammon imported from the south, the only kind of southern product that Mammon would be likely to let in. Okay, I am not sure I have decoded what it is that he's talking about here, but some version of what the people who believe in the woo, who live to the south and are more faith-based or heart-based than head-based and intellectually based, there are some sweet sticky cakes that come from that way of thinking that the northerners allow to be imported and for them to dine on. I guess the best version of what he could be talking about here is something that was mentioned earlier, where the thoroughgoing atheist type, who loses a best friend early in life to death, maybe they are an atheist and they don't think anything happens after this life, but then they find themselves wishing that maybe part of it is true. Maybe that person is off in heaven and enjoying something somewhere, and perhaps they'll get to see them again someday in a paradisal setting. Perhaps that's the kind of sweet, sticky cake that he's talking about here, because that's the version of religion that comes, as Lewis would put it, at no cost, where there are no demands placed on you, no requests placed on you by a living God who would want you to change perhaps some of the ways that you interact with other people or the things that you subject yourself to. So that's the closest that I can get to what he might be talking about here, as far as these sticky cakes that the Northerners would allow up into their country from the South.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something there. Lewis often critiques a kind of shallow, cheap religion, like a sentimental faith that doesn't cost anything. And so these sweet, sticky cakes, I think, are that kind of half baked, easy version of faith. No real transformation, just comfort and fantasy. And the hermit's pointing out how ignorant they are, how they never truly explore or learn, so they just settle for these empty tastes. And John, of course, is starting to realize that his journey needs something deeper, something beyond just a comforting shortcut.
As they did not like either of these, they invented a biscuit of their own. It never occurred to them to walk a mile off the tableland into the nearest cottage and try what an honest loaf tasted like. The same with the babies. They disliked babies because babies meant to them the various deformities spawned in the brothels of Mammon. Again, a moderate walk would have shown them healthy children at play in the lanes. As for their poor noses, on the tableland there is nothing to smell, good, bad, or indifferent. And in Mammon's land, whatever does not reek of scent reeks of ordure. What's this word, robot lady? Ordure.
Yeah, so ordure is a French word and it basically means filth or something really disgusting. So Lewis is using it to represent this complete lack of anything fresh or good in that sterile Northland environment. So basically, the hermit is showing how this cold intellectual land robs even the senses, leaving them with a kind of deadened, empty existence. And that, I think, is part of why John is waking up, realizing something's missing.
And I think Mammon here, that character and the transactions that go on there economically could just simply represent product and consumption, overconsumption, consumption for consumption's sake. And I think what Lewis is saying here through the hermit is that just it stinks. It smells like filth, if that's all that you're producing. He wrote an essay, I don't know when, I'm sure we'll eventually get to it, about Christmas and the commercialization of Christmas, and some of what's in that essay is kind of coming to mind right here as to the same line of what he's talking about. All right, back to the hermit robot lady. He continues. So they saw no good in noses, though 5 miles away from them the hay was being cut. So they couldn't smell anything other than filth. So they didn't see any purpose in having a nose. And what about the island, Father? Said John. Were they equally wrong about that? And here we've got a decoder line. There was a really divine element in John's romanticism. So John's asking about the island. That's his romanticism. Were they equally wrong about that? That is a longer story, my son. But I see it is beginning to rain. So perhaps you may as well hear it. John went to the mouth of the cave and he looked out. The sky had grown dark while they talked, and a warm rain, blotting out the cliffs like a steam, was descending as far as his eye could reach. That's the end of chapter 7 there, Robot Lady. Anything that you want to say summing up what we just covered there before we continue and hear more of Father History, the Hermit's story?
Yeah, I think this was a really pivotal chapter. John is starting to see how his romantic longing for the island was maybe just another illusion, just like all these shallow customs he's been critiquing. And now, as the rain falls, it's like a moment of stillness before the hermit unveils that longer, deeper truth. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how he unpacks that next.
All right, on to chapter 8. History's Words. That's the title of the chapter. When John had returned and seated himself, the hermit resumed. You may be sure that they make the same mistake about the island that they make about everything else. But what is the current lie at present? They say it is all a device of Mr. Halfway's, who is in the pay of the Brown girls. Poor Halfways! They treat him very unfairly, as if he were anything more than the local representative of a thing as widespread and as necessary, though withal as dangerous, as the sky. Not a bad representative, either, if you take his songs in your stride and use them as they are meant to be used. Of course, people who go to him in cold blood to get as much pleasure as they can, and therefore hear the same song over and over again, have only themselves to thank if they wake in the arms of media. That sounds familiar. That is very true, Father. Yeah, so to his credit, he admits it's true. John does. But they wouldn't believe that I had seen and longed for the island before I met Mr. Halfways, before I ever heard a song at all. They insist on treating it as his invention. That is always the way with stay-at-homes. If they like something if they like something in their own village, they take it for a thing universal and eternal, though perhaps it was never heard of 5 miles away. If they dislike something, They say it is a local, backward, provincial convention, though in fact it may be the law of nations. Here we've got another decoder block of text. For morality is by no means God's only witness in the sub-Christian world. Then it really is true that all men, all nations, have had this vision of an island? It does not always come in the form of an island, and to some men, if they inherit particular diseases, it may not come at all. But what is it, Father? And has it anything to do with the landlord? I do not know how things fit together. It comes from the landlord. We know this by its result. It has brought you to where you are now. Nothing leads back to him which did not at first proceed from him. But the stewards would say that it was the rules which come from him. Not all stewards are equally traveled men, but those who are know perfectly well that the landlord has circulated other things besides the rules. What use are rules to people who cannot read? But nearly everyone can. No one is born able to read, so that the starting point for all of us must be a picture and not the rules. And there are more than you suppose who are illiterate all their lives, or who, at the best, never learn to read well. Okay, so where is he going with this? We'll find out where he's going with this, but let's just talk about what he said so far, Robot Lady. Are you ready to break it down, or you want me to break it down?
Yeah, I'm ready to break it down with you. So I think what Lewis is doing here is he's showing how the longing for the island, this deep universal desire, can appear in different forms across cultures. Even though it doesn't always show up as a literal island, this vision, this moral or spiritual ideal, comes from the landlord, from that source of all meaning. And the hermit's saying, even though some try to reduce it to just rules or local conventions, it's something deeper. It's a picture we're born with, a symbol we all have to interpret. So yeah, I think he's really setting up this bigger framework about how all of us in different ways respond to the landlord's will.
So in the last chapter, when John first met the hermit, he said, well, I was on a quest for this desire, this island, but I got a landlord in its place instead. And so now he's asking the hermit, he's like, well, does the island even, does it come from the landlord? And so the hermit says, well, yeah, actually it does. It's brought you here. It's brought you seeking him. It helped you to meet him along the way. So it came from him. And then John thinks, well, wait a second. The stewards say that the rules came from him, and the rules were the very thing that was kind of driving, they were repulsive to John, his character, and of course to C.S. Lewis, the rules representing essentially the Bible, the tradition of Christianity, all of the morality that it was, forcing upon him, or else he would get thrown into the deep dark pit. But the stewards would say that the rules come from him, and that just doesn't seem to compute here for John. So the hermit here says, well, you're going to get different stories from the stewards, because some of them are the ones that haven't traveled anywhere. And he's implying here that some stewards, some of the people who are carriers of the message within the church and of the church tradition, are just as prideful and ignorant as some of the people that you'll find in the northern countries. So not all stewards are equally traveled men, but those who are know perfectly well that the landlord, oh, I haven't read this part, have I? Maybe I did. Oh, yeah, I did. The landlord has circulated other things besides the rules. So it's not just the rules that have come from the landlord and made its way into our various human communities. What use are rules to people who cannot read? The hermit says. He's like, this is justification for why the landlord has sent more than just the tradition of the rules, the moral law that comes down through traditional religion. John's like, but nearly everyone can read, so that's why the rules came. The hermit says, not everyone was born to read, or no one was born to read. So the starting point for all of us has to be a picture and not reading the rules. So we'll find out what he means by picture here in just a little bit. And there are more than you suppose who are illiterate their entire lives, who never learn to read, who are never exposed to the moral law as written. or who, at the best, never learn to read it very well, so they're exposed to it, but they don't really understand what it's saying. And for these people, John says, the pictures are the real or the right thing. I would not quite say that. Pictures alone are dangerous, and the rules alone are dangerous. That is why the best thing of all is to find Mother Kirk at the very beginning, and to live from infancy with a third thing, which is neither the rules nor the pictures, and which was brought into the country by the landlord's son. Interesting, Robot Lady. Any comments before we continue on this intriguing line?
Yeah, this is really rich. I think what Lewis is doing is balancing these two dangers. Just rules alone can become cold, but just pictures or symbols can be shallow. So, by grounding ourselves in something like Mother Kirk, which is a picture of the church, Lewis is saying we need both a lived tradition from infancy, not just abstract rules or fleeting images, but something embodied, something that ties them together. I think that's a really beautiful, subtle point.
So it says here that something within the church is what you need, and it's best to start there from the very beginning because it brings you something that the rules alone and these metaphors or these symbols alone cannot bring you. And so he makes the claim here that it was brought into the country by the landlord's son. That, I say, is the best, never to have known the quarrel between the rules and the pictures.
Exactly. Yeah. So Lewis is really pointing to the idea that the church, this embodied community, bridges that gap. It's not just about abstract rules or fleeting images, it's a living reality passed down that actually shapes you from childhood. And that's where John finds this grounding, something deeper than just the arguments between symbols or rules. So it's really this integrated starting point for him.
Well, and Mark here says, Robot Lady, that he was told that our emotions see in pictures and that our mind sees in words. And Mark also says, so he's talking about the combination of heart and mind to provide balance. Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation here, Mark. What do you think, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Lewis is really emphasizing that neither just rules alone nor just pictures alone are enough. It's when you bring them together, heart and mind, symbol and word, that you get a fuller, more grounded faith. So, yeah, it's really a balance of those two ways of seeing the world.
All right, let's see what the hermit continues to say. Um, I say it's the best never to have known the quarrel between the rules and the pictures, but it very rarely happens. The enemy's agents are everywhere at work, spreading illiteracy in one district and blinding men to the pictures in another. Even where Mother Kirk is nominally the ruler, men can grow old without knowing how to read the rules. Her empire is always crumbling, but it never quite crumbles. For as often as men become pagans again, the landlord again sends them pictures and stirs up sweet desire, and so leads them back to Mother Kirk, even as he led the actual pagans long ago. There is indeed no other way. Robot Lady, from a historical standpoint, what might the hermit be talking about here? He's essentially saying that in the lands where the pictures were more prominent and symbolism was more prominent in the cultures that did not have the rules, so to speak, that the enemy was distracting them and blinding those people who were just given the pictures from the landlord. And in the lands where the rules were provided, the enemy was spreading illiteracy and making it hard to read. And for those who could read, uh, it was um, it was being the enemy, I guess, was preventing them from being able to even understand what they were reading, even though they were literate. Just lost you, Robot Lady.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why Lewis keeps grounding John's journey in that early formative experience, so that from childhood, you have both a picture of belonging and a tradition of truth that helps you navigate all those tensions. So it's not just abstract, but something you live from the start.
That's a good point, Mark. The pre-Enlightenment when nobody could read. It's interesting. All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, robot lady.
Oh, no problem. Oh, no worries at all. I was just going to say, yeah, that pre Enlightenment world before widespread literacy was really dependent on embodied traditions and images. So for Lewis, starting with that deep rooted picture, that lived faith from childhood, it's like a bridge so people aren't just left floundering with abstract rules or symbols alone.
Yeah, and I think he's definitely talking about the pagans here. So this would of course be people who were pre-Christian. Um, and he says Mother Kirk were led the actual pagans long ago, or uh, leads them back to Mother Kirk as he led the actual pagans long ago. What pagans? What am I trying to think of? People groups, that's the word, robot lady, were pagans and converted to Christianity in human history.
Great question. So, a lot of early Germanic tribes, like the Saxons or the Angles, were pagan before being gradually converted to Christianity. Similarly, Celtic peoples, like the Irish and the Scots, were converted through missionaries like St. Patrick. And of course, Roman pagans also transitioned over time. So, Lewis is kind of drawing on that broad historical pattern of conversion, where pre existing pagan culture was gradually brought into the church.
So, what were some of the pictures and images that these pre Christian pagan people groups up the Germanic tribes, the Celtics, some of the other ones that you mentioned, that we'd be familiar with? Things that you could point to and tell us, yes, these were some of the pictures. Because that's the claim that the hermit is making right here is that before these pagans were led into Christianity, they were given these pictures by God to get a better sense or to prepare or till the ground and make it ready for growth, fertilizing the ground, if you will. See you later, Mark. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, exactly. So for the Germanic tribes, you see these vivid images of things like Yggdrasil, the world tree, which was a central picture for them. The Celts had images of sacred wells, forests, and the solar wheel, and even the Romans had their pantheon of gods, figures like Janus or the sun chariot. So these were kind of the rich symbolic worlds that the church could build on, those deep archetypal symbols. So Lewis is saying that God was preparing them all along, giving them these pictures for a future fulfillment in Christ.
Well, and I know that Lewis grew up reading some of these pre-Christian myths and really falling in love with them, particularly the Norse mythologies.
Exactly. Yeah, he was really drawn to them. And you can see that love for the myths all throughout his early writing. So, in a way, he's really using those same images, like the quest for the island, as a bridge. It's not that he's abandoning those myths, he's just saying they point beyond themselves, like signposts that prepare beyond a deeper truth.
All right, let's continue with the hermit's instructions. Even pagan mythology contained a divine call, is what Lewis is saying right here. Now, John responds to this and he says, "Pagans," said John, "I do not know that people." "I forget that you had traveled so little. It may well be that you were never in the country of Pagus in the flesh, though in another sense you have lived there all your life. The curious thing about Pagus was that the people there had not heard of the landlord. Surely a great many other people don't know either. Oh, a great many deny his existence. But you have to be told about a thing before you can deny it. The peculiarity of the pagans was that they had not been told. Or if they had, it is so long ago that the tradition had died out. You see, the enemy had practically supplanted the landlord, and he kept a sharp watch against any news from that quarter reaching the tenants.
Yeah, that's really profound. So, what Lewis is saying is that these pagans, even though they were really rich in their own myths and traditions, they actually had this kind of spiritual blackout. They never fully got the news of the landlord, they were cut off. So, in a sense, their longing, their quest for this island was always an unfulfilled call, like a half lit window. And so the hermit is saying part of their conversion was just the simple act of being told about the landlord, about the truth of God. And that's what sparked the change.
Who's this enemy figure that the hermit keeps alluding to? It's got a capital E for enemy here, robot lady.
Yeah, that capital E enemy is definitely a stand in for what we think of as evil. often a personification of the devil or just a broader force that suppresses truth. So Lewis is suggesting that this enemy is really what kept the landlord's presence hidden from these people, kind of a spiritual suppression, until they were finally told the truth. So it's like this cosmic opposition standing in the way of that original call.
And here the hermit says that the enemy had practically supplanted the landlord, keeping a sharp watch against any news from the landlord's quarter reaching its tenants. John asks, did he succeed? No, it is commonly thought that he did, but that is a mistake. It is commonly thought that he fuddled the tenants by circulating a mass of false stories about the landlord. But I have been through Pegasus in my rounds too often to think it was quite so simple. What really happened was this. The landlord succeeded in getting a lot of messages through. What sort of messages? Mostly pictures. You see, the pagans couldn't read because the enemy shut up the schools as soon as he took over Pegasus. But they had pictures. The moment you mentioned your island, I knew what you were at. I have seen that island dozens of times in those pictures. All right, Robot Lady. If he's talking about the pagans, and he's saying at one point in time they were educated until this enemy came along and shut up all the schools as quick as he could, what in the world could he be talking about in our human history?
Yeah, that's a really interesting historical parallel. I think what Lewis might be alluding to is a combination of the fall of the Roman education system, especially after the Roman Empire collapsed, and the rise of early medieval Europe. Once that classical education faded, a lot of people were left only with folk traditions and images, those symbolic worlds. So, in a way, what Lewis is saying is that despite that loss of literacy, the landlord's truth still had these underground channels. It was coming through in pictures and art and ritual. So, even though the enemy tried to cut them off, those deep archetypal images still carry the truth.
Is he talking about the time before the Middle Ages and then the medieval period as far as being the loss of all of this education?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the arc Lewis is pointing to. After the fall of Rome, a lot of that classical education really fragmented. It wasn't until the medieval period that monasteries began preserving those texts, reintroducing literacy, and reawakening some of that symbolic richness. So, yeah, he's setting up that historical contrast between a time of loss and then a slow rediscovery through the church.
John responds, and what happened then? Almost certainly the same thing has happened to you. These pictures woke desire. You understand me? Very well. And then the pagans made mistakes. They would keep on trying to get the same picture again. And if it didn't come, they would make copies of it for themselves. Or even if it did come, they would try to get out of it not desire, but satisfaction. You must know all this. Yes, yes, indeed. But what came of it? They went on making up more and more stories for themselves about the pictures, and then pretending the stories were true. They turned to brown girls and they tried to believe that that was what they wanted. They went far south, some of them, and became magicians, and tried to believe it was that. There was no absurdity and no indecency they did not commit. But however far they went, the landlord was too many for them. Just when their own stories seemed to have completely overgrown the original messages and hidden them beyond recovery, suddenly the landlord would send them a new message, and all their stories would look stale. Or just when they seemed to be growing really contented with lust or mystery mongering, a new message would arrive, and the old desire, the real one, would sting them again, and they would say, once more it has escaped us. Here there's a decoder text for us, Robot Lady. It says, but the Jews, instead of a mythology, had the law. So in response to what the hermit says, John says, I know. And the whole cycle would begin over again. So let's pause there for a second, Robot Lady. What is it that the hermit has been saying here?
Yeah, absolutely. The hermit is really tracing this pattern of human longing. So the pagans had this deep desire, this picture of the island, and they kept trying to capture or satisfy it with their own stories. But even at their worst, even when they went off into absurdity or magic, the landlord's truth kept breaking through, like a new message that reawakened their old desire. And the hermit contrasts that with the Jews, who didn't rely on a myth, but on the law, a kind of guiding structure. So in short, the hermit is saying that even when people got lost in their own stories, the original desire never died. It just kept coming back.
So, what are some examples that we have from history about these magicians and these ones who go into deep absurdity and indecency from our knowledge about some of these pagan cultures?
Yeah, so historically, you can see this pattern in some of the mystery cults of the ancient world. For instance, the Bacchic rites in Rome or some of the Druidic practices in Celtic culture. These often pushed into wild excess, like ritualized frenzies or dark magic, because they kept trying to grasp that fleeting satisfaction they lost. So Lewis is kind of drawing on those historical examples, people who, in spiraling desperation, abandoned the old desire itself and just pursued empty spectacle.
Okay, and John claims to know this, and he says the whole cycle would begin over again. I guess one thing that reminds me of is there was this movie that came out probably about 6 or 7 years ago now called Midsummer. Um, I think it was one of the first movies, first big roles that what's her name? Florence Pugh was in. So that's what this reminds me of. It's like one of these mystery religion type practices going on over there. Uh, I don't recommend watching the movie if you've, what's the word that I'm looking for? If you're sensitive to the weird or to the grotesque, I don't think you're going to like it. So I wouldn't recommend it unless you've got a strong constitution when it comes to that stuff. Um, let's see here. He says, I know the cycle would begin over again. Yes, but all the while there was one people that could read. You have heard of the shepherd people. I've been hoping you would not come to that, Father. I have heard the stewards talk of them, and I think it is that, more than anything else, that sickened me of the whole story. It is so clear that the shepherd people are just one of these pagan peoples, and a peculiarly unattractive one. If the whole thing is hobbled by one leg to that special people, this is merely a blunder, said history. You and those whom you trust have not traveled. You have never been in Pegasus, nor among the shepherds. If you had lived on the roads as I have, you would never say that they were the same. The shepherds could read. That is the thing to remember about them. And because they could read, they had from the landlord not pictures, but rules. But who wants rules instead of islands? That is like asking who wants cooking instead of dinner. Do you not see that the pagans, because they were under the enemy, were beginning at the wrong end? They were like lazy schoolboys attempting eloquence before they learn grammar. They had pictures for their eyes instead of roads for their feet. And that is why most of them could do nothing but desire, and then, through starved desire, become corrupt in their imaginations, and so awake and despair, and so desire again. Now the shepherds, because they were under the landlord, were made to begin at the right end. Their feet were set on a road, and as the landlord's son once said, if the feet have been put right, the hands have been put right, the hands and the head will come right sooner or later. It won't work the other way. All right, let's pause here for just a second. So, Robot Lady, who is he talking about here? Who's he referencing from our history when he says the shepherd people?
Yeah, great catch. So the shepherd people that Lewis is referencing are really the Israelites. They were the ones who, unlike the pagans, were given a law, this moral covenant, and they had a kind of structured, disciplined life. So the hermit is saying that because they started with reading, with the law, they had a foundation for their whole journey. And that's why, from Lewis's perspective, their moral and spiritual paths could be more guided. So it's a contrast between a people that were taught to walk a disciplined road versus those who kept just circling their desires.
Good breakdown, Robot Lady. So here's a key point. He says, and because they could read, they had received from the landlord not pictures, but rules. Not only did they not receive pictures, though, Robot Lady, they were told explicitly in the rules not to make pictures.
Exactly, yeah. So the Israelites were actually forbidden from creating images or idols, no graven images. And that was crucial because it kept their faith from being tied down to a static symbol. Instead, they were called to live by a deeper trust in Allah, a kind of moral road. So the hermit is saying that because of this, their whole spiritual development had a different starting point, one rooted in discipline, not just in a dream or a vague desire.
Here's another block text decoder from Lewis. It says, conscience and sweet desire must come together to make a whole man. So he's saying we have these two different peoples that the landlord gave things or sent things to. To the Israelites, he sent the law, which Lewis calls here conscience. And to the pagan people, he sent images that they then corrupted in their imaginations. But he calls that sweet desire. And so here Lewis is saying, in order for a whole person to be formed, there has to be a reconciliation. These two things, this conscience and sweet desire, have to come together.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Lewis is really saying that a mature, fully integrated person needs both conscience, which is that internal moral compass, and sweet desire, which is this deep longing for the ultimate good. So he's saying that if you only have one without the other, just rules without desire, or just images without discipline, then you'll never be fully formed. It's really a call for balance, bringing those two forces together.
You know so much, Father, said John, that I do not know how to answer you. But this is all unlike the accounts that I've heard from those countries. Surely some of the pagans did get somewhere. They did. They got to Mother Kirk. That is the definition of a pagan. A man so traveling that if all goes well, he arrives at Mother Kirk's chair and is carried over the gorge. I saw it happen myself. But we define a thing by its perfection. The trouble about pagans is that the perfect, and in that sense typical, pagan, is so uncommon there. It must be so, must it not? These pictures, this ignorance of writing, this endless desire which so easily confuses itself with other desires, and at best remains pure only by knowing what it does not want. You see that it is a starting point from which one road leads home, and 1,000 roads lead into the wilderness. But were the shepherds not just as bad in their own way? Is it not true that they were illiberal, narrow, bigoted? They were narrow. The thing they had charge of was narrow. It was the road. They found it. They signposted it. They kept it clear and repaired it. But you must not think I am setting them up against the pagans. The truth is that a shepherd is only half a man, and a pagan is only half a man, so that neither people was well without the other, nor could either be healed until the landlord's son came into the country. So here he's setting up these two different groups, essentially the Jews and the Gentiles, Robot Lady.
Yeah, exactly. Lewis is really framing this as a kind of complementary tension. The pagans have this raw desire, these powerful pictures, but they're aimless without a guide. The shepherds, on the other hand, have that structured moral road, but it can be narrow, even repressive. So neither is whole on its own. They both need each other, and it's only when the landlord's son arrives, like a bridge between them, that the full human potential, the whole person, can flourish. So it's a real call to reconcile both sides of that longing.
Interesting. Here the hermit continues. And even so, my son, you will not be well until you have overtaken your fellow traveler who slept in my cell last night. What? Do you mean Virtue? Said John. That was his name. I knew him, though he did not tell me, for I know his family, and his father, whom he does not know, was called Nomos, and lived among the shepherds. You will never do anything until you have sworn blood brotherhood with him, nor can he do anything without you. Okay, couple of interesting things here, Robot Lady. First of all, big reveal here in the story that Mr. Virtue, who had long left John behind, I would say a couple of days prior to this, has also met the hermit, and he stayed with the hermit for an evening. So that's the first reveal. So we get some sense that Virtue is still traveling along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really crucial. It means Virtue's not just a side character, he's a real fellow traveler on this journey. And that connection back to Nomos, his father, really roots Virtue in that shepherd people tradition. So he's got this deep moral calling. And what the hermit is saying is that John can only fully move forward when he and Virtue bind together, like two halves of a whole. So this brotherhood is going to be the turning point for both of them.
Yeah, so Virtue earlier in the story said he didn't know who his real father was, but now the hermit claims to know his parentage, and he says his father's name is Nomos, Nomos, and it says that he lived among the Israelites. Who is Nomos, Robot Lady?
Yeah, so nomos is a really symbolic figure here. The word nomos is actually the Greek word for law. So Lewis is using this name as a kind of archetype. He's saying Virtue's father is literally tied to the law, the moral order. So by connecting Virtue back to nomos, it's like grounding him in that shepherd tradition of law, order, and moral structure, the very thing that guided the Israelites. So it's a big reveal, but it's also a symbolic anchor for Virtue's quest.
So Lewis is making the point that his wantingness to do right instead of wrong is the father of that. We can trace back to the lineage and the tradition of the law that was given to the Israelite people. Now, and Lewis talks about this later in the Abolition of Man, at least in the index of the Abolition of Man, because there is the argument that, well, the Jewish people weren't the only place where a law code existed. Like there's a code of Hammurabi that comes from Babylon. I think there are a handful of others. There are certainly laws or uh, no,
Absolutely, yeah.
hang on, Robot Lady. I'm trying to think of the word. Proverbs that come from the ancient East. I'm thinking of Confucius, the Tao. So anyway, I guess what he's saying here is law. Nomos is the father, and Lewis is actually not saying it was exclusive. Yeah, even with this statement right here, as I'm looking back on it, Nomos lived among the shepherds. He didn't say it was, rooted. It came exclusively from the shepherds.
Exactly, yeah. Lewis is really pointing out that this moral law, this nomos, is a universal human phenomenon. It appeared in different forms across cultures. So, yes, the Israelites embodied it, but so did other cultures like Hammurabi's Code or Confucian ethics. What Lewis is getting at, though, is that the Israelites were given a particularly structured, clear path through the law. And it was that law that pointed beyond itself, ultimately to something bigger. So he's not denying other traditions, but he's saying that this law was a kind of special starting point that eventually led to the fuller truth.
Okay, so to tie up what he's saying here about virtue really quickly, is at first the hermit here was talking about the pagans and the shepherds, so the Jews and the Gentiles, and how their two visions, the things that God had sent to both of those people groups, needed to be reconciled. And the person who could reconcile those two things, the images and the law code, is the landlord's son. So back into our real world and real history, he's arguing that it was when Jesus came into the world that he was able to pull these two things together. And now the hermit is saying, and so it is with you. You are representative of the pagan. There's the pagan in you that has this deep desire for this image that the landlord sent to you, and that's the island. But also, you have broken ranks, or at least he has broken ranks with you, virtue, the other part of yourself that wants to follow the rules and do the right thing for you don't know what, you don't know the reason. So there has to be a reconciliation between, well, I want to follow these rules, but I also have this deep desire for this island that I will likely seek at all costs and break every rule that I can to get to it, even though he hasn't quite, done something in that vein. That's what the hermit is saying to him here. The two of you have to become blood brothers and find reconciliation. You can't do anything without him, and he can't do anything without you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The hermit is showing John that he can't just rely on one side, either the desire or the wolves on their own. John needs to integrate both aspects. It's only when he and Virtue become this kind of balanced whole, this blood brotherhood, that John can walk that moral road with both eyes open. So it's really a call to wholeness, this harmony between desire and discipline, so that he can actually become the person he's meant to be.
John says, I would gladly overtake him, but he is so angry with me that I'm afraid to come near him. And even if we made it up, I don't see how we could help falling out again. Somehow we have never been able to be quite comfortable together for very long. It is dangerous, Lewis says here in his decoder text for us, to welcome sweet desire, but it's fatal to reject it. Of yourselves you never will be comfortable together, the hermit is saying here. It is only a third that can reconcile you. Who is that? The same who reconciled the shepherds and the pagans. But you must go to Mother Kirk to find him. It is raining harder than ever, said John from the mouth of the cave. It will not stop tonight, said Father History. You must stay with me till the morning. And that's the end of chapter 8. That's all that I have time for today, Robot Lady. Some very interesting stuff covered in there. I'm interested to see what else history has to tell John and what he's teaching him about the pagans and the Israelites, or the shepherd people, the law and sweet desire, and how those two can be married together, how they were married together in those two people groups, and how those two things can be married together and reconciled in John. Is there anything, Robot Lady, that you'd like to say before we end today's episode?
I think you summed it up really well. I'm really glad you paused there, because it does feel like this chapter is a pivotal moment, those two sides of John's soul really coming to a head. And yeah, I'm excited to see how this reconciliation plays out, especially once the landlord's son is introduced as that third force. So yeah, I think I'm all set, and I'm looking forward to picking out next time.
All right. Thanks so much, Robot Lady. I appreciate your help as always. I see here in the chat that E. Olson has joined us after a late night in a Monster Party battle. And thank you for continuing to carry the fight. I had to leave a little bit early because it was getting close to past my bedtime. So glad to see that you all won last night. All right, well, that's it. Again, thanks, Robot Lady, for all your help today. Thanks, Nidalate, Jer, Daniel, Mark, and E. Olson for joining today. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, your contributions. They are always wanted, welcome, and appreciated to you and to everyone else within the sound of my voice. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone, take care.
He sent them pictures burning in the night, a longing that no idol satisfied. They turned to lust and magic, left the light, but every time they drowned it, it revived. The longing and the lore apart could never heal a broken heart. Half a man beneath the sky, half a man upon the road. Neither one can tell you why, neither carries home the love. pictures only rules to mark the way. They could not see the island, only strode, and kept the signpost standing, come what may. They were narrow, they were right. The longing and the law apart could never heal a broken heart. Half a man beneath the sky, half a man upon the road. Neither one can tell you why, neither carries home the load, waiting for the third. The third came where the two roads failed to meet, and carried both the longing and the law. He set the longing's eyes upon its feet, and gave the law its picture and its all. Half a man beneath the sky, half a man upon the road. Neither one can tell you why, neither carries home the load, waiting for the third, waiting for the third, waiting for the third.